Hey Nuggets, welcome back to the final PSA in our mini series about mental health and taking care of yourself and how you can tell when you are not okay. The topic this time is anxiety, which I feel is just becoming a huge mental health issue for teenagers, really increasing in the last number of years. So to help us figure out what the deal is with anxiety and what to do with it if that's what you're dealing with, I have a good friend of mine, Jessica Hotchkiss, who used to intern with us here in Holly when she was in her school counseling program. She is now a child life specialist at Essentia and is a mental health counselor at Prairie Land Counseling in Fargo, in addition to being this close to being done with her doctorate in counseling education at NDSU. So, Jess, thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us again. Okay, so the topic is anxiety. What is anxiety?
Well, the one thing that I think people do a lot is they say, oh, I'm anxious. I have anxiety, I'm anxious, but really people don't know what it actually is. And so there's some things as mental health providers that we're looking for in order to tell kind of what the difference is. So some of the big differences, thinking about even just being a teen in the school setting, okay, I worry about this test coming up. That's okay. You're allowed to worry. It doesn't mean you have anxiety, right? But if that worry becomes constant, and one of the things that we're going to look for and ask too is how long have you had some of these feelings of excessive worry where you feel like it's kind of all the time or you're worrying too much, or maybe it's more than you have in the past. So again, if we're comparing kind of like I have this big test coming up, I want to do a good job, that's different than worrying all the time to where it interrupts kind of your daily life. And that's the biggest thing. Even when we talked about depression in the last video, when it interrupts your daily activities, your daily life, that's when we know we have to kind of look at seeking out some additional support for that. A lot of people tell me I feel awkward or I feel anxious in social situations with friends. Well, that can also look very different than, I have this friend who I'm going with to this party and I might feel like I'm not going to know anyone. That's different than avoiding social gatherings or not wanting to be around a lot of people. Again, this is kind of pre-COVID. We have to take this with a COVID lens of maybe you don't want to be around a lot of people right now because it's not, it's frowned upon with COVID times. But when you're avoiding social gatherings because you're anxious about, speaking in front of people or saying the wrong thing, and again, it kind of interferes with your functioning of making friends or being with other people, that's a big thing to think about as well. Panic attacks or having panic-like symptoms are also associated with anxiety sometimes, where our heart is beating really fast. We might feel like everything's racing. Those are things to kind of be aware of too when we talk about anxiety. But panic attacks or feeling nervous before maybe giving a speech in a class, that would be different than having panic attacks that come on out of nowhere. They're hard to control or again interfere with your daily life. Being nervous before a speech event is kind of normal because you want to do a good job and you're going to talk in front of a room of people, as opposed to maybe having a panic attack in the middle of class and you're not sure what's going on. The biggest thing there is, are you having worries that kind of feel unexplained or feel like they're excessive, meaning they're happening a lot and they're hard to control? And if they've been happening for a long time, that's when we want to be aware of something going on.
So definitely a difference between like I feel anxious or I think I have anxiety, like a really clear difference between those things. So what are some, like when you have a student you are talking to in your work who is struggling to figure out like how to live with anxiety and how to manage it, what are some of the common symptoms or experiences that they have, just to give us some examples of like what it can look like specifically?
Yeah, well, I think, we talked about like the situations where maybe we're avoiding meeting up with friends because we're afraid we're going to do something or look dumb or, I just can't do it. And again, we're looking at it from an excessive worry. I'm worried about all these potentials that could be happening. And when we feel that way, it can impede the things that keep us, healthy and functioning and making us feel safe. So worrying about, going to school, or even those feelings of perfectionism can kind of come in there sometimes. I have to do this the right way and exactly exactly the right format. And if I can't do it this way, I'm not going to do it at all. Or worrying so much about a project that you're putting it off into the last minute. And now we're kind of freaking out as to how that's going to turn out. But really with excessive worry, it can look a ton of different ways. Worry about family members or friends. One of the things that's really prevalent right now with COVID is that people can get COVID. What would happen to my family members if I got sick or if they got sick, or if I'm feeling excessively worried about those germs, or excessively worried about school or about this extracurricular activity. It can kind of fit in with whatever's going on in your life. But again, when it impedes what you're doing, that's when you know it's different.
Can you talk a little bit about when people start to feel physical symptoms along with that anxiety that they have, that's the mental health piece? Because I think at school, that is one of the things that we see with our kids that are struggling to get through life with anxiety, is that sometimes they feel physically sick as well.
Yeah, and we didn't touch on this a lot in our video on depression too, but somatic symptoms, meaning the way that our body physically experiences things, is really prevalent in a lot of our mental health. So if we're even feeling overly stressed about something, you might notice for that big speech that you have sweaty palms, or you're getting really nervous and your mouth starts to get dry. With anxiety, you might start to notice that your heart's beating really fast and it's hard to control. You might feel like the room is spinning. You might notice kind of that nausea or that stomach feeling. And all of those things kind of go along with how your body's responding to what's going on. And that's really important to notice, because there are things that we can help do to kind of alleviate some of those symptoms associated with anxiety. A lot of people tell me they have trouble focusing too when they're feeling anxious. And so even things that can help ground us, I tell a lot of people doing things in the room. If you're sitting in your desk, chewing mint gum can be a good way to kind of keep you grounded. If you're starting to notice that your heart's racing a lot, to do this deep breathing exercise that nobody else in the room has to know that that's what you're doing, but you're kind of helping regulate what your body needs in that moment. Being very present in the room and looking for 5 things around the room you can see, 4 things around the room that you can hear, and going down 3, 2, 1 with all of your senses is a really good way to ground yourself. Square breathing is another good one. Belly breathing we talk about a lot in schools. Anything that can get you kind of calming yourself down, because I think one of the biggest things is that feeling of kind of uncontrollable racing thoughts and that heart beating really fast.
Yeah. And I think for kids too, it's that same, like we talked in the depression one, like that little like voice on your shoulder that's saying you're not good enough for depression. I think sometimes for anxiety, for kids that I have worked with, that little voice or that like kind of the running thought in your head is things like, it's not going to be good enough, or what if it's not good enough, or what if everybody laughs at me, or what if nobody likes me? Like all those what if scenarios tend to be, that's the voice that we have that is really just like, oh, it's not the truth. That's just kind of your brain messing with you. That is the tricky part, I think, sometimes about anxiety. So if a student is worried that maybe that is something that they or a friend is dealing with, what are some of the options they have to treat it or to learn how to manage their anxiety?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is kind of knowing what to expect too, and knowing what are going to be some of those triggers for you where you do feel anxious, and then how to control them. That's the biggest one. And so you do need help to figure that out, because if you were able to do it on your own, you'd be doing it, right? You'd have some of those things. But again, if you're like, hey, I just feel anxious sometimes, which is probably more of the norm. Again, those things like apps that can, the Calm app or the breathing app or any of those things that you find on your phone are really helpful. Just as a baseline, here's a way that I constantly take care of myself, going back to that constant self-care. But the other thing I really wanted to mention, and this kind of is true for all the things we've talked about today, is if your friend's dealing with something, we as human beings have a tendency to take care of others. And that's amazing and great and speaks to how wonderful you all are. But it's really important to encourage your friend to also seek out that help from a trusted adult, because as teens, you are so smart when it comes to technology, you can beat us 100-fold. But I think it's important to also recognize it's not your job to take on what's happening for them, but to be a really good friend and help them with it as they get additional help. And that's really important.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of wisdom in knowing like what we can help somebody with, and when it's time to bring in the experts with it. you know, if a student would come and see you, for example, for anxiety, you know, what I see your role being is kind of like a coach, like you're helping them figure out like, okay, how is this working for you? And then let's figure out some ways that help you maybe change how you're thinking or change how you are behaving, give you some strategies for that. Would that be right?
Yeah, and it's figuring out what's right for you, because I can give about, 101 suggestions for different things to try. But again, it's really suited to how does this fit for you? Something that, I recently worked with a client on was creating kind of this safe place. We call it resourcing, which gives you kind of these basic coping skills to go to. And when we think about that safe place or this experience that brings us that feeling of calm and joy, I'm sure, Lori, you have one too, but mine's like going to a beach, just a basic, like I love the sound of waves and kind of that feeling of sand. Some people, it's like smelling fresh cookies or being with a family member or their pet. So having that kind of as your go-to and kind of thinking about that when you need to is really important. And one of my clients was like, we like to create visual representations. This is what it's like, guys, when it's live. Welcome. But we like to do those visuals because to see that safe place on paper or whatever it is helps you in a time where you feel like you can't get that control yourself. So her idea was, well, instead of like doing it on paper or anything like that, let me make it into my lock screen on my phone, because then I can click it, look at it whenever I need to, and it's going to be right there because you always have your phone on you. Right. So that was one of the things that was really good for her as well, but might not work for some people. So you've got to figure out, when you're working with whoever it is, your school counselor, your therapist, a family member, what are those things that work for you and what can we tweak?
Yeah. Another piece that is a valuable option is going to be the medication part. And it's a lot like we talked about in our depression segment, is just working with your doc to see if that is an option that is going to be right for you or is something that you want to try. And again, totally your decision between you and your family and your medical provider. But a lot of kids will say they find relief from their anxiety just because it takes the edge off so that they can actually, like, they can manage it on their own again.
Yes. And it gives the opportunity to kind of, comparisons I've heard from people who are on anxiety medications, which again, they've said, therapy and medication works really well for me. And some people have said just therapy works really well for me. And that just kind of depends on who you are and what your needs are. But that medication piece that I've heard is sometimes it just kind of slows you down enough for you to be able to do the rest. And sometimes those racing thoughts can be hard to navigate without the med, and sometimes you don't need it. So it's important to figure out what's going on for you in order to meet that need.
Right. Okay. Well, Jessica, thanks for talking through anxiety. And I know we just this is like the tip of the iceberg, because this is big stuff and it's different for everybody, but hopefully it helps students kind of begin to understand a little bit more what it looks like and how they can proceed if they think that's what they've got going on, whether it's now or in the future. So Jessica, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Nuggets, we'll have more PSAs coming your way soon. So please share out with family and friends and take care of yourselves, guys.
Yes. See you later.